Everybody, welcome to today's meeting of the Minds webinar entitled New Urban Indicators for City Services and Quality of Life. Sorry about the sound checks earlier. I know you could hear us. We were having some technical difficulties. We have a lot of presenters today. My name is Jessie Feller. I'm the Executive Director of Meeting of the Minds. A few housekeeping notes just to begin. As you entered the WebEx console, you either joined us by audio broadcast or by phone, which was automatically muted. Because of our large audience in attendance today, you will remain muted throughout the event. We will, however, have a Q&A session during the second half of the hour. When you have a question, please enter them into the WebEx Q&A panel as you think of them. You can find that Q&A panel in the bottom right-hand corner of the console. It's the bottom right-hand box. We would also appreciate your input regarding today's webinar, so a short survey will pop up when you close your browser at the end of the event. So today we have 4 presenters in this order. First we have Patricia McCarney, who's President and CEO of the World Council on City Data in Toronto. She's also Director of the Global Cities Institute at the University of Toronto. Next we'll have Andrew Collins, who's the Assistant Director of Intelligence and Analysis at the Greater London Authority. Third is Maria Belén Perez-Shada, who's an Urban Planning Analyst at the City of Buenos Aires. And then last, we'll have Alvaro Lima, who's the Director of Research at the Boston Redevelopment Authority. Lots of presenters and content today. But first, we're going to hear shortly from Curtis Johnson, who's with Citiscope, who are our co-hosts today. So Curtis, take it away.
Hello, I'm Curtis Johnson, the Executive Director of Citiscope, and we want to add our welcome to this webinar and say it's an honor for us to co-host with Meeting of the Minds. Just a brief word about Citiscope because it's new and different. We launched this global news service last January with support from the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations. We publish once a week with a fresh story about some innovation coming out of one of the world's cities, quite often ones that are ignored by the mainstream media. We aim for an audience of people who don't merely care about how cities develop, but who are in positions to shape urban destinies. People like elected officials, planners, engineers and architects, academics, civic and business leaders, economic developers. You get the idea. We hope you'll take a look at our stories on www.citiscope.org. And better yet, we'd like you to sign up for our weekly email newsletter, which has the original stories as well as a roundup of major news and reports from cities around the world. And now to Patricia McCarney for an overview of today's webinar.
Good afternoon. This is Patricia McCarney from Toronto. I'm very pleased to be here, and my thanks to Jessie at Meeting of the Minds and Chris at Citiscope for organizing this webinar today. It's my pleasure to present to you my slides on the World Council on City Data and the new ISO 37120. We have just launched both of these entities. We have published ISO 37120 this year and launched the WCCD in May 2014. So I will begin with my presentation. I'm just going to advance to the first slide. I hope everyone on board can see this. So part of my presentation will be on ISO 37120 and the introduction of the World Council on City Data. So my presentation is divided into 4 parts. The first part, and I'm sure this is very familiar to many people on the call, but just in case, I thought I would pose the question, why cities, why metrics? As we all know, the demographic strength of cities and repositioning as a 53% of the population now live in cities going to 70% in 2050, together with the fact of the economic prowess of cities now commanding over 70% of GDP. When you put those 2 things together, we can fairly say that cities are commanding a very important presence on the world stage, and this is only destined to increase by 2050, this GDP per capita is going to 70% of the planet. So the need for data, we all know there's many different and very far-flung needs for city data. One being just simply around infrastructure. If we think of the scale of demand plus the scale of investment needed in infrastructure, the need to be smarter and have better data to support these pivotal decisions over the next, especially this next decade, is extremely important for all our cities and our city leaders. So good data is essential in moving forward. There's many challenges around the field of city data. We've been working on this, trying to crack the standardization issue since about 2008. As most of you know who work on city data whatsoever, it's extremely difficult to have comparability across cities globally. One of the challenges is especially around boundaries. There's really no conformity in how cities are clustered and ranked and how data is put together according to different scales of cities, whether it's a greater metropolitan area, an agglomeration, a city proper. It really does wreak havoc, this question of boundaries. And as we know, most cities' data is collected at national level by national statistics agencies, not so much locally. So we saw that as one of the key challenges to overcome as well back in 2008. But these next two, no standardized definitions on what to measure and no standardized methodologies on how to measure, are the two probably most pivotal challenges that we've been confronting and trying to overcome over these last 6 years of work here in Toronto. We found in working with the cities globally that often cities, in fact, had no baseline at all for data in cities. So a city like Kabul, for example, hasn't even had a census in many years since prior to the war. So, you know, these kinds of even just getting simple baseline data is very difficult. And finally, there's really been no good mechanism for data and knowledge sharing across cities, especially data that's comparable according to standardized definitions and methodologies. So we started to work on that in 2008 together with the World Bank. They approached us in 2008 with 9 pilot cities. Cities were asked what kind of data they were gathering back then. It turned out that many of the cities that we were looking at in this pilot had many indicators being developed. So in fact, there's pretty good data at the city level in many cities across the world. However, everything was being measured completely differently. So when the cities came together in Toronto in 2008, they put on the table all 1,100 indicators across the 9 cities, but only 2 of those indicators were comparable. Different definitions, different methodologies, different boundaries, etc. So we set out to solve that. It was a big challenge at the time, working with 9 pilot cities. We started to rewrite definitions and methodologies and prioritized according to what cities were already measuring and what those cities wanted as key sets of indicators that they deemed as priorities. We then rolled that out to all cities globally, and since 2008, we've built this network of 255 cities across 82 countries. We then started to work on how to see comparability across the cities and started working on analytics and visualization to help cities to build comparable structures. We then moved into the International Standards Organization in Geneva. In 2012, we deemed it appropriate to see if ISO would consider a standard for city indicators. At that time in 2012, when we went into the ISO, there were no city indicators whatsoever. Cities just weren't on the map in Geneva. So we started to build something from scratch, and we developed a committee, and it's called TC268. This committee, for those of you interested, Working Group 2 is ours around city indicators, which I chair. There's one also built by the Japanese on smart community infrastructure, which is metrics for very detailed technical infrastructure metrics. Another one on systems management, which the French chair. So this is a Canadian-run committee. which we have built into ISO TC 268 to really look at sustainable development of communities. Our working group is called Working Group 2, and there's about 20 countries now. I think it's even 24. Just recently, others have been joining us. We've had 6 international meetings. The draft standard that we went into ISO with in 2012, we came out the other end in 2014. After 5 drafts, there were at least 4 international ballots and 300 comments received on the list of indicators. And we published this ISO 37120 in May 2014. We were fast-tracked through ISO. It normally takes 6 years to build a standard, but we were, because we had already tested this draft standard with our 255 cities, they thought it was possible for us to actually move faster than a normal standards development. So we're very pleased to announce that we have this published. And what's inside this ISO standard? So there's 100 city indicators. There are 46 core and 54 supporting indicators with a common language for reporting. So all of the definitions and methodologies are now standardized for 100 indicators. It's the first time there's ever been an ISO standard for cities. The indicators are across all of the themes that cities, in fact, are already measuring. So 17 themes and the 100 indicators are grouped accordingly. The standard is needed, and we've been discussing this with many of our member cities and how they're using it. There's many different things, such as basically better decision making, but also creating both local and global benchmarks. Is a framework for sustainability planning, and also we're told leverage for funding by cities with senior levels of government, because increasingly leaders are asking, well, how is this city doing? How is our city doing relative to peer groups on a global scale? Especially around infrastructure projects, we're finding that the evaluation of impact and performance on large infrastructure investments and the construction of smarter and more sustainable cities are something the ISO standard provides a toolkit for assisting on all of these fronts. So the users, cities, municipalities, local government, but also increasingly we're finding researchers and business leaders, designers and other professionals, and citizens, even high school students are starting to use the data. Our next ISO standard, as a result of our work within ISO on 37120, we then started to build 37121 because there was so much demand in the international ballots going out to add new indicators. So I think there's over 800 indicators now in our Dropbox at TC 268 on resilience. And so demand for city indicators around resilience and emergency preparedness is so vast that we've now started work on a new standard, 121, which is on resilience in cities. So some of the newer indicators that we're building and starting to group thematically from that list of some 900 that countries and cities are contributing to the ISO process are the themes as listed. Finally, we've been implementing now the global standard on city data, and we've created a pilot program for 37120. To make this work, we've created and built something called the World Council on City Data. This is the host for 37120. We have invited 20 foundation cities from around the world to help pilot this with us. So the first 20 cities are just now, as of this week in fact, coming through the gate of being the first 20 cities worldwide to be in conformity with ISO 37120. And I'm very pleased to let you know that Boston, who's on the call with Alvaro, London with Andrew, and Buenos Aires with Belen, those three are three of the key cities that we've been working with in the Latin America, North America, and European regions to help us to create the foundation for the WCCD, and are the first cities through the gate of ISO 37120. So finally, in conclusion, our next steps Next week, in fact, we will all be convening with Andrew hosting us at London City Hall with the mayor and the deputy mayor, and all of our cities are coming, the 20 foundation cities, really to celebrate the first data release of ISO 37120. So the first time we have standardized data, third-party verified by auditors and certified under ISO 37120. We will release this to our cities both as a book and with a new web portal. And so the next steps, we're opening this to all cities globally. We already have some 100 expressions of interest. So cities like Los Angeles and Pittsburgh and other cities are already stepping up across, including other cities in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and North America. So the first step for a city is to sign an expression of interest and prepare the application form, which we've created, to file the first 46 core indicators, and then the audit and certification process begins and some back and forth, and then the city joins our registry at the WCCD for ISO 37120. The World Council then has this first step, which is an expression of interest, which is on our website. We have been building our 20 foundation cities, which I've just indicated to you. Our next step is also to build foundation partners. So the United Nations Environment Program and some of our corporate partners like Philips, Siemens, Cisco, and others, we will be building a set of foundation partners to help drive this, including hopefully the United Nations, Habitat, and World Bank, and our former partners. These are the partners that we've been working with since 2008, so we're hoping to continue to build the WCCD with our partners. So thank you. This whole exercise is around connecting cities with globally standardized city data. That's our website, www.dataforcities.org, and it's been a pleasure to share this experience with you. I would like to now pass this off to our 3 foundation cities, starting with Andrew Kalenge in London.
Thank you, Patricia, and good evening, everybody. I am sitting in that funny-shaped building that you saw a few minutes ago on about the 3rd floor, and it is raining and dark, just like it was in the picture. But I'd just like to say good evening, and just to echo a little bit of what Patricia has said, how excited London is to be in this first tranche of cities taking part in the WCCD. What I will do is just talk a little bit about some of the headline indicators and how they relate to London, the indicators that we are especially interested in, before moving on to some sort of suggestions for future indicators and London's approach to open data, before delivering just a few concluding remarks. So just moving my slides on. I mean, we are really pleased to be certified as platinum level, and what that means is, as I understand it, that we have scored between 91 and 100 in covering all of the indicators that we have to collect as part of this exercise. That means that we've hit all of the 46 core indicators and then upwards of 45 of the supporting indicators as well. I think that says something, and Patricia did touch briefly on the different states of maturity in terms of the data that a city has at its disposal, and I think we are sort of quite lucky here in London in that we have, for a number of years, had organisations like the Office for National Statistics, some of the other organisations from whom we have to collect data, like Thames Water, a utility serving London's water supply, the Metropolitan Police, who deliver London's police services. We all have a reasonably open approach to the sort of the sharing and utilisation of this data. And some of the things that we have been particularly interested in with regards to the headline indicators are the economy, and we do look really closely at how we perform with regard to economic performance. In relation to other global cities, we have an unemployment rate that is its lowest since 2008, but underneath that, and what is one of the sort of sub-indicators, for the WCCD exercise is a quite troubling unemployment rate amongst 16 to 24-year-olds of 21%. So it's really important for us that, yes, we can see the headline indicator, but then also that we can dive down underneath that and get to grips with some of the detail and the comparisons with other cities there. And the same goes for things like education. We were really quite pleased with governance and how we perform on that. Sort of equality is important to us. On transport, we heard last week that London is transporting more people across this city than ever before, and one of the sort of quite startling things for us, I think, is that we sort of come top on that in terms of transport, the number of journeys that we make on London's transport system. I think there's one statistic that says the tube travels about 43 million miles per year, which is enough to get you halfway to the sun. But the important point there is that we can see how hard our transport system is working in relation to other cities, because, again, it's one of those things that is obviously critically important for the proper functioning of a city and its competitiveness. And on the green side of things, the Mayor here is really keen and has a large tree planting programme. So these are things that on the face of it might seem sort of quite obscure, but are still really important to us and have a big sort of urban planning perspective for us. And, you know, we can see how well we do on things like the number of trees that we're planting in relation to other cities. On indicators of special interest to us, again, sort of continuing with the economic theme, we are really keen to understand how we compare with regards to London as an attractive base for innovative businesses. So again, it's really helpful to see the comparison of new patents registered in London compared to other cities, and being able to sort of explore different parts of the structure of the economy here. So digital and tech and media and medical research are all things that are really important to us. And on the more human side of health as well, again, we have a mayor who's really keen to sort of encourage active transportation and the more human side of transport. And we have almost 500 kilometres of bike paths and lanes here now in this sort of tangled set of roads and pathways and lanes that we have. So understanding again how we deliver on that priority compared to other cities is important. And then also there are other things that I've not mentioned on the slide here. I mean, we've got the Howard Davis Airport Commission report that's come out today. So understanding our sort of air connectivity, which again I think we do well on for the moment, but we're acutely aware of there are other cities catching us up, is important, as is the number of internet connections in the city. You know, being able to offer connectivity in as new sections of the economy develop is really important. Is really important to us. We would be keen to hold discussions on how in the future we sort of expand the future indicators, and I was excited to see some of the things that Patricia mentioned in her presentation. So some of the things that we want to concentrate on and mention there around financial exclusion, education. Again, we think we do quite well on globally ranked universities, but we can always do better. Attracting tourism is really important to us. And in fact, on overcrowding, and I sort of referred to that on the last slide in writing, we, in the last census in this city, found out for the first time in a considerable period of time that the occupancy rate, or the number of people living in individual households, had grown for the first time as a result of the recession in 2008, and we want to see how that situation develops in the future. I just want to go back to where London is at the moment with regards to open data and how we want to see the Global Cities Institute data feature on our open data portal. We have a data store at the moment. It largely works on a sort of London city basis. One of the ways in which I want to see it develop in the future is that we are incorporating many more comparisons from international cities. One of the issues that we've had in the past, and one of the great things about Patricia's initiative, is that now we have a degree of conformity and uniformity. And yes, we have 20 cities in for the present, but I hope in the future that there will be many more join us to the initiative, and being able to show international perspectives on London's data store, and indeed to start to share some open data from other cities across the world, will be really important to us. So just a few concluding remarks. Again, I think Patricia touched on this really, but here in London, I think we're increasingly cognizant that it's the relationship between cities as trading points and sort of key nodes in the economy that is just as important in certain circumstances as the relationship between cities and nation states. I mean, I think it's certainly true to say that the relationship between cities and nation states is changing, and we've had a sort of big devolution debate here in this country in the past few months and years, and that rumbles on, and now it is one about cities and how they can sort of take greater powers from their national governments, and I think this sort of evidence base really helps with that. There is the broader point about effective decision making and how, when a city mayor can look at a set of data and say, well, my city is excellent at this, not so good at that, taking into account some of the notes of caution that we should around indicator sets. Again, this is just a really powerful tool that, because of the conformity that we now have and the uniformity, it is of greater value. And because I've mentioned cities and devolutionary powers, we are looking to raise more of our own taxes or raise more of our own finance. One of the ways in which we might do that is through city bonds, and having this sort of information helps us to create a sort of city as asset class potential. Huge value in the future, I think, in open data. I mentioned that, but as we move to sort of smart city environment and Internet of Things, being able to look at live city data performance is something that I look forward to making real in the future years. And then the way in which we start to carve ourselves up as well. We are a varied bunch, our initial 20 cities. As more joiners come in, then there is more potential to establish peer groups of similar cities and indeed working groups amongst people who are interested in similar things. So that's my early experience, and very positive early experience from London. I look forward to developing the initiative, and now I'm going to hand over to, I think, Belen in Buenos Aires.
I know I'm having some trouble with the audio, and you know that English is not my native language, so I'm going to try and speak slowly and clearly so that I can make myself understood. Well, today I would like to introduce you to the way we work in Planning Buenos Aires with the use of standards and indicators that help us evaluate and intervene in the correspondence way. Buenos Aires is a city as capital of Argentina that has a strategic geographic location on the Atlantic Ocean that turns it into the main connection between the country and the rest of the world. That is why it holds a key role in Argentina's economy. This fact is reflected in its high population density. You know, we are 40 million people in the country, and 13 of them living in the city of Buenos Aires and its metropolitan area. That is saying that the 32% of the population lives on 1% of our country's surface. Buenos Aires has an extension of 200 square kilometers, and nearly 2 million persons live in it. But it also receives over 3 million people every day that come for the day, mainly to work, while living somewhere else. The legal and conceptual framework I will show you in the next slide shows a structure composed by the strategic plan, the environmental urban plan, and the territorial model. Taking the environmental urban plan, for instance, which is this one, we can see the 6 topics through which we will analyze the city. These are structure and centrality, transport and mobility, habitat and housing, public space, production and employment, and urban heritage. This is the territorial model displayed in the city extension. It is composed by the 6 topics I just mentioned, which are territorialized here on the images below. The following slides will show each of the topics with its corresponding guidelines for territorial action. Once again, we have structure and centralities, transport and mobility, habitat and housing, public space, production and employment, and urban heritage. This is a set of indicators for urban sustainability we use in Buenos Aires. The system developed consists of 50 indicators, which are combined to create 6 different indexes that correspond to the topics proposed by the Environmental Urban Plan Law. Notice the smaller ring in the middle of the slide is divided into 6 indexes, which are dismembered into the larger ones from a general to a particular analysis. This complex system results into an overall one we call the ISU. ISU stands for Urban Sustainability Index. The rates show a slight evolution in this short time period if you take into account 2010 to 2014, and the last number is a set target based on a desired and yet possible future. The following are the partial evaluations of improvements since 2010 for each of the topics. In the following slides, you will see in detail how each of the topics over territorial models such as habitat and housing, structure and centrality, are being evaluated and targeted to our desired future. Let me go back to Buenos Aires. I wanted to show you a concrete example of application of this system to see how it is really put into practice. And this is the Buenos Aires Verde structure plan. You know, here the new green spaces proposes a multi-criteria analysis that is derived from the ISO index aimed at determining the optimal localization for future green spaces. This tool is going to help us see where green space is really needed in the city. So we built up an indicator to help us see the areas that need this space with a priority for action. This is the structure of the public space index, which is composed by the environmental index that has, for instance, the indicator of soil permeability, the corrected compactness index. This is the relationship between built space and open space, taking into account only pedestrian public space. And the last group is formed by all the lists you see here, and the one that interests me to show you my example is the green space proximity indicator. So this is a standard we set that states that every citizen must have a green space at a distance no longer than 350 meters. So going back to our example, the new green spaces will use this indicator of proximity to show us, for instance, the deficient areas of green space. As you can see, the map shows in orange the places that would become our action fields. What is done next is the urgency evaluation. So there's a selection of indicators with a corresponding weight according to the facts that trigger the urgency for green spaces in Buenos Aires. For instance, we have public space deficit that is measured by the corrected compactness indicator I just mentioned, flood risk, which is composed by 3 indicators, building density, flood recurrence, and height above sea level, and social vulnerability, that is the density and income index, composed by population density and social stratification. In this case, the most critical situations will be areas with high density and low income, for instance. The following maps show the results of the measurements for each indicator within the city area. Finally, this is the result that shows a 1 to 100 ranking of priority areas for green space creation, stating which areas present more urgency because of high flood recurrence, for instance, which will be the ones that will be intervened first. Finally, I wanted to show you an example of these new spaces plan that's taking place. Plaza Boedo is an example which was created in a neighborhood with social vulnerability and lack of green space. And it really helped reduce the deficit in the area, resulting in a quite positive environmental and social impact. Before passing to Alvaro, I just wanted to share with you that Buenos Aires was just notified, received the gold certification for the ISO 37120 standards. And, well, I personally see it as a step forward towards the broadening of consciousness in the development of sustainable communities. So, Alvaro, now, if you can join me. Thank you very much.
I'm Alvaro Lima, Assistant Director of Research for the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and we are very happy to have achieved platinum status for the city indicators, and I would like to thank my team for their incredible effort. For us, the headline indicators have to do with our higher education sector and our city's connectivity. Boston is home to 35 colleges and universities, enrolling 150,000 students, and this translates into one of the most educated population and labor force in the country, with 43% of the city's population holding a bachelor degree or higher. Boston's population is also very young, actually the youngest amongst the largest 25 cities in the country, with 35% of its population between the ages of 20 and 34 years old. Boston's transportation infrastructure provides not only for speeding up business transactions, but also for the rapid transportation of its labor force. Boston is a leader in internet connectivity with more than 70,000 internet connections per 100,000 residents. As you can see, for a modern city like Boston, these indicators are very important. The indicators of special interest for us have to do with our strong economy and its capacity to increase innovation. After reaching its peak in 1950, when the city had 800,000 residents, Boston's population's decline reaching its lowest in 1980, when it started to grow again to pass the 600,000 mark in 2010. Boston's basic job exceeds the resident labor force by more than double, supplying approximately 1 out of every 6 jobs in Massachusetts. So it's a very vibrant economy, and it's crucial for us to keep track using indicators and comparing these indicators and our performance with comparable cities. On the innovation front, Boston leads on National Institute of Health funding with 47 hospitals, education institutions, organizations, and companies in the city receiving almost 4,000 awards the last fiscal year. This is the largest quantity of awards awarded to a city in the United States. Boston is the international capital of innovation, a city where talent and capital clusters together to drive business growth. Last year, we issued 271 patents. These it has an equivalence of 42.5 patents for per every 100,000 residents, and a great engine on this sector are our universities and colleges. What we suggested for future indicators, it has to do with Boston's experience, its population, and its economy. We think that's very important to think about indicators of diversity immigrant integration, and economic inclusion. Measure of diversity, immigrant integration, and economic inclusion is crucial to Boston's next development phase, given the characteristics of its population and economy. Over the last decade, the racial and ethnic composition of our population changed dramatically. From closer to 70% white in 1980 to a majority minority city in 2000, and again, it's reflected in the 2010 census. So it's crucial to have indicators that see how well this population is doing and how well the population is doing in its many different segments. Boston ranks 7th among the 25 largest cities in the U.S. in the proportion of the population that's foreign-born, 26% of its population, and it's crucial to measure how well immigrants are integrated in the city. Actually, I think that this is crucial for many cities, given that the world today is on the move with 214 million immigrants, in international immigrants, and I think it's very, very important for us to think about what are the measures of integration, how we'll go about measuring how well integrated are immigrants in global cities. Boston economic progress on the last decades was not shared across the city and its population. And to think about economic inclusion, not just economic growth, I think it's also another front where we should think what are the indicators, how we measure and how we compare how well we are in economic inclusion. I think that for these reasons, measures of diversity, immigrant integration and inclusion are of great importance for us, and I hope that also for our city partners. I will stop here, and I would like to invite and hope that many other cities will join us, and here is our contact. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro. That's great. We're going to now go into our Q&A session. So there are a lot of questions have already come in the Q&A box, which is the bottom right-hand box on your screen where you can type your questions in. And just to clarify, we will have the slides available on the website as well as the recording, so you can hear and watch the webinar and share that with your colleagues if they missed it. So the first question, this is for you, Patricia, from Michelle Martellera. She asks, how are the indicators scored or ranked, and how will users be able to compare indicators across cities?
Thanks for the question. So the indicators are now being entered onto a new web portal, which is part of the ISO standardization effort. The certification takes place through a web portal that we've just been building over the last 4 months. That, too, will be launched next week in London. At that point, anyone can log on and start to look at indicators in a comparative context. So perhaps you're interested in only, I don't know, a peer group that's just U.S. cities, or if you're interested in cities in a 1 million to 4 million range or under 1 million. Or a GDP range of X or Y. You can then compare cities, and you can compare them either by bar graph or by horizontal displays, or you can actually plot them and graph them. So it's the visualization on the website. We've tried to make it really easy, so even high school students can start to use the web portal for school projects. So you might want to ask a question, for example, how safe is my city? And then you could look at levels of homicide per 100,000, number of police officers per 100,000, response time, et cetera. And you can compare your city in population peer group or in a level of development peer group or relative to youth unemployment, or you can start to run those kinds of comparisons. It's pretty simple and quite easy, and the visualization is, I think, quite nicely done. So that will all be available as of next week in London when we launch the web portal as part of our gathering of the global cities, the foundation cities for the World Council on City Data.
Great. And this is another question for you, Patricia. Anjali Mahendra asks, and this is a question relevant for cities in the developing world, would cities get technical assistance, i.e. hand-holding, to measure the 46 indicators through the process?
So we can put the cities in touch with specialists on data assistance. In the initial stages, especially coming through the Global City Indicators Facility work, we have been assisting cities in the less developed world, Africa, Asia, Latin American cities, to better report. Now that it's part of the ISO standard, there can be training for cities that we can help to set up for cities to be trained by outside parties to help build that capacity. We're also thinking about one of the agenda items for discussion in London, actually next week with the Foundation Cities, is how cities themselves can assist other cities in various peer groups to learn about data collection. So already, for example, the national government of Mexico, for example, has come to us and said we would like Mexican cities to adopt ISO 37120 so that there's comparative data across all cities in Mexico. So the national government has asked us for some capacity building assistance on for a Mexican pilot. The same holds true with Malaysia. And I just returned from China last week, and the national government of China is also considering adoption of ISO 37120 for Chinese cities. So, you know, there's a lot of capacity building and training which can start to happen over the next few years, and we can help to facilitate that in some way as we move forward. But the indicators are very much global. So cities in Africa like MENA, Nigeria, Johannesburg, we already have 55 cities in the network of GCIF cities. 55 cities in Africa are already reporting on the original set of lesser number of indicators that we created back in 2008. So it was built for cities and by cities also in Africa, Asia, and Latin America.
Okay. And Brian Cotton wants to know, once the city's data is recorded, according to the ISO standard, how frequently will it be updated and refreshed? That's for you, Patricia.
It'll be updated and every year, so it's an annual report. And so certification for cities will occur annually.
Okay, great. Someone asked, where is this? Oh, Marilyn Hamilton's noticed that the list of cities, there aren't any cities from Russia, but are they joining or waiting in the wings?
Yes. In fact, I just had an email yesterday from the national standards body in Russia to talk about adoption by the national government, the National Standards Organization of Russia, which is equivalent to ANSI in the U.S. or Standards Council of Canada in Canada. The Russian national standards is considering adoption, and there's 2 cities that are showing interest already in signing an expression of interest to be ISO conformity.
Great. Joanne Leach asks, if a tiered system of indicators has been considered, say, based upon levels of development, for example, as Andrew mentioned, an indicator for the percentage of people living in slums is only of value to cities with slums.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, and what was the question?
Oh, are you guys considering a tiered system of indicators, say, based upon levels of city development or country development?
Well, we do have peer groupings for cities, for example, because as I think what the question is getting at is this whole idea that maybe, you know, maybe London or Boston may not have a high percentage of slums, such as a Nairobi or a Dar es Salaam may have. So that number is quite skewed if you tried to compare. So the web portal is designed and all the functionality is now built so that a city like Nairobi or a city like Mumbai, for example, which has a higher percentage of slums according to the UN definition and according to the ISO definition and methodology, those cities can group themselves into peer groups according to GDP or income per capita, for example. That then has a better comparative basis for slums in those cities.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is kind of related, but Matt Anderson asks, how are areas for the data made comparable? For instance, if data is collected by an individual municipality, by a core city, which includes various municipalities, or by the city's metropolitan area, i.e. the commuter area, how are all that data made comparable?
Okay, that goes back to one of my original slides on the standard and the need for standardized data. And one of the chief challenges is, of course, these boundaries. So we begin with the administrative boundary of cities so that a mayor and a council and a city manager will be reporting on their level of service delivery and quality of life according to their administrative boundary. That said, we realize that many cities are part of a larger metropolitan area, or they would like to aggregate the data to their agglomeration, to the urban agglomeration, or to their metropolitan area, all of these different higher level organizations across cities as we know them. So we've been building an aggregation tool for cities and testing it here in Toronto. So we started with Toronto proper, which is the administrative boundary. But then, of course, there's what we have here is the Greater Toronto area, the GTA, and then we also have something called the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which wraps around Lake Ontario. So that those kinds of boundaries include sometimes 25, 36, depending on where you draw the boundary. So we've created an aggregation tool so that every city in ISO conformity with their 100 indicators can actually aggregate up according to a specific theme. So, for example, if you're interested in competitiveness of this greater urban region, you could look at patents, or you could look at higher ed degrees or economic development indicators. Or if you're interested in mobility, you might look at different indicators around density and sprawl and commute times, et cetera. So that's the way we're building it, because if you start at the top and a city is reporting for the greater metropolitan area, but in fact it's 6 municipalities within, then sometimes that data becomes very, well, it's just less standardized because of these boundary issues. So we start with the administrative boundary.
Great. Sally Nisha has a question, and I'll direct this one towards Andrew first. Can you comment on the potential or actual inclusion of citizen-generated data via civic tech and apps like Fix My Street? Is there an indicator on that, and how can cities incorporate that user-generated and citizen-generated data in the future? Has London done anything with that, Andrew?
Okay. I think I'll give a local answer to that, and then if Patricia wants to comment on the wide application, then please go ahead. One of the things that I am really keen to see on the new London data store is data from a range of sources, and I mean a range of sources across government. I mean data from the private sector, from utilities, telecommunications companies, so on and so forth, banks, those sorts of organizations. But yes, also data, as you suggest, that comes from citizen sources. Now, what we clearly need to do is to make sure that we apply some kind of standards to that data so that people actually know what they're dealing with and can use that data as effectively as they possibly can. But I think citizen data is a really useful way of understanding what is happening out there in communities, or how communities view the world, more importantly. Just one other thing that I would add, I mean, I think there is this trend for wearable technology as well. So I think citizen data starts to spread into some really interesting areas which give potential to lots of sort of bottom-up initiatives around how, for example, we would measure people's health, people's lifestyles, and how that could then contribute to a better understanding of public health issues and conditions like diabetes, for example.
Great. Any comments on that, Patricia?
I would just add that the complementarity of big data and citizen-generated data to this reporting through ISO is actually really an important component of the work going forward, because, you know, we could have citizen surveys or citizen opinion polls through the technologies that now exist. We're actually speaking with a few firms and partnering, potential partnerships, whereby they can survey citizens in different cities on a question. I don't know, for example, like how clean is your air, and then you might get an opinion survey back, but for 20 cities, and then we could generate the same for the 20 cities from the ISO data, and actually, you know, help to support or even maybe contradict that data in terms of opinion to make people feel that, in fact, their city's doing rather well compared to what they had thought in the survey. The same holds true for some of the big data around mobility and commute times, and I know IBM and Cisco and others are heavily involved in looking at mobility patterns through big data. Again, this data that we collect at ISO can, through the World Council on City Data, that standardized annual reported data on number of public transit trips and commute times or patterns of mobility and density, et cetera, those can actually support and be complementary to the big data.
Great. Tatiana Peralta is asking, Patricia, this is for you, does the ISO methodology require the data to be made public? It sounds like the portal is public and it's continually updated. And the question is, will the data for the 250 cities being collected by GCIF, is it going to be made public? Sounds like it is, but can you clarify?
Yeah, the ISO has no stipulation on public versus private in the standard itself, but in building the World Council on City Data, we are ensuring that that data is public and it's on the web portal that citizens and anyone, researcher, designers, World Bank officials, whoever is interested in accessing the data, it will be there for, and to actually perform some of the analytics right there on site.
Great. And how do you guys verify the sources of the data and know if the data is authentic?
Well, we have ISO as part of the ISO certification process. So for a city, as our cities have mentioned here on the phone, the foundation cities, so London, for example, and Boston and Buenos Aires have just shown conformity with ISO 37120, and they're certified under that as platinum and gold, et cetera. That means that they've reported upwards of 80, 90 indicators in each case. That data is certified by third-party verifiers. So we have on the World Council staff, we have a number of statisticians here in-house, but then as part of the ISO certification process, we actually hire third-party verifiers who are people who have audited for ISO standards under management systems, for the environmental standard, et cetera. So these are experienced ISO auditors that are now, that we hire to certify the data.
Great. That answers about 3 people's questions. So, and then Tamara Arsenal asks, this is for you, Patricia, how will cities focused already on using ISO 9001-2008 guidelines for the public sector on quality management and ISO 18091 for local governments, how will those be integrated into these indicators and into that process?
So those are very complementary standards for us, and in fact, the data will actually support across the standards. So, for example, in the management systems standard, under Working Group 1 in TC268, they're developing a new standard on management systems for cities and communities. that standard, once it's published, which probably is in the next few years, maybe a little quicker, hopefully, that standard will be an umbrella for ISO 37120. So in fact, the indicators can be part of the management systems standard. So they're all very highly complementary.
Great. We're going to go over a few minutes since we have so many questions, and if you can stay with us, including the presenters, that would be great. We'll only go over 5 minutes, but we have a bunch of questions we didn't get to, and we're going to, hopefully everyone can stay with us. One more question, Patricia. What are the costs associated with the certification? A bunch of people are asking that.
Yeah, that's being worked out because this first 20 cities that we've been working with now, partly the cost is determined by the number of hours that have to be paid to the auditors for the certification process. And that is actually becoming pretty clear. We should know by London next week when we all gather. We'll be discussing the parameters for that. We have a kind of low and high level mark at the moment, but we'd like to work that out. So some cities, for example, the data was quite difficult, so the auditors spent a whole lot more time on some cities than others. Some cities only reported the core, 46, and some reported 96, so there was more time in terms of certifying the 96 as opposed to the 46 core. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. We're also looking at regional and income level of the cities to see if we can't come up with a fair price point for all of this certification effort. We're trying to keep it as modest as possible. We're a not-for-profit organization that's been set up to create the ISO conformity and the audit protocol. So we have actually built an audit protocol now into the web portal, and we've created the unique identifiers that will be the basis for these 100 indicators. And we've now built this registry as well for cities. Once they're confirmed and certified, they become part of this WCCD registry for sustainable cities. Great.
Alex Slaymaker asks, this is for you, Patricia, what drivers would help accelerate the adoption of these standards, and what are the largest barriers to adoption right now?
I think the things that would accelerate it are how we shape the benefits for cities in how we get that word out. What we're hearing back from cities, and maybe Boston and Buenos Aires and London could respond on this better than I can, but the benefits of having ISO certification, there's really quite a vast list that's being compiled by cities telling us how they're using it. So some cities, you know, we always believe that cities only want to showcase their best data and, you know, put their best foot forward on a global stage like this. But in fact, you know, if they're not doing as well as some of their peer cities globally, that message can go back to City Hall, to their mayor, and to senior levels of government to actually leverage funding and investment for their city. So, you know, if they're, I don't know if their investment in infrastructure around transit is lagging, they can actually use these numbers to leverage funding from senior levels of government and also, you know, make very sound evidence-based arguments in City Council that, you know, this is why we need more investment in transit. Look at how we're doing relative to 5 cities in our peer group in the U.S., for example. That's one big use. We also know that there's quite interesting applications going on, and I think Andrew mentioned this in his discussion earlier in the hours, whereby he was talking about insurance and creditworthiness and bonds, et cetera, that the evidence of cities, in fact, they can save quite a bit of money in insurance premiums if they're ISO certified because it shows that they have good data on emergency preparedness, emergency response, on safety, on wastewater and stormwater drainage, all of those kinds of indicators that support insurance companies' policies towards a city. Certainly around the investment in infrastructure, to have benchmarking tools that you can actually showcase if you're a city, for example, in South Asia, you might want to report and be able to better benchmark against an investment in infrastructure loan from the World Bank or from a grant from the United Nations Habitat or UNEP, et cetera. If you have good evidence-based data in your city, you can actually showcase how well that investment is paying off over time. So, there's a lot of different economic development arguments around cities reporting, and I think politically it builds transparency in local government. It certainly builds openness for citizens and students and researchers to understand their city better.
Great. Andrew, do you have any comments about barriers still or adoption?
Yeah, I mean, barriers. I do think that we need to overcome some of the skepticism that exists around what has been, still is, a welter of different league tables and means of classifying cities, but that's exactly why this initiative is valuable, and I'll just underscore that message earlier. This is about creating uniformity and as close as we will ever to get, because there are things called lies, damn lies and statistics, but as close as we will ever get to one universal truth about how cities perform in relation to one another.
Great. Alvaro, any comments about this from your perspective in Boston?
I think that there's two interesting aspects of that for us. One is as producers of data, we, government, are always looking for third-party validation. And to have data that we produce and you have this kind of validation, it's really great, because one thing that it gives you is that it's an external look that on the data you are producing. I think that the other thing that for us was very important is that it forces us to ask the question, what kind of data should we be collecting, and how we organize ourselves to produce this data in a very organized way year after year. And so that's what I think was extra benefit of going through this process was you can imagine that in 100 indicators, how many departments you have to coordinate to provide this data with a methodology that's not necessarily the methodology they use. And I think that that's a big chunk of work that for us was very useful, but I think that will be also for other cities.
Great. Okay, well, there's a question, Ling Hao He. Your questions, they were answered in the beginning of the webinar, which it looks like you missed, so you can access the recording of this webinar and the slides on our event page. Dave, if you could just put that back up on in the Q&A panel so people can see it. And there's a lot of information on the event page for the webinar at cityminded.org. There's some background information and documents from Patricia and her colleagues, so you can access some more information. But Patricia, what's the best way for people to follow up if they want more information from you? The website and the URL, can you remind us, and then possibly any other resources?
So www.dataforcities.org is our website, and there's a contact address there.
Great. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to wrap things up because we got to most of the questions. But if you're having a strong urge to get your question answered or in a different way, feel free to email us. My email is Jessie, Jessie @cityminded.org, and I can put you in touch with either Alvaro, Belen, Andrew, or Patricia, or Citiscope. So that concludes our session for today. And just a reminder, the short survey will pop up once you close your browser. We really appreciate your feedback. We hope we're always working to improve these webinars. And I think today was a good test of our international reach with our WebEx platform. So I just want to thank our presenters. Thank you, everybody, Curtis, Patricia, Andrew, Baleen, and Alvaro. And we hope to see you all on our blog, cityminded.org, at our monthly meetups and webinars, and, of course, to save the date for our annual summit, which will be held October 20 to 22 in Richmond, California, in the Bay Area. So with that, have a great day, and thanks so much, everybody. Thank you to our presenters.